Hey everyone, welcome back to American Dreamers. Today's episode is our first interview episode. I'm interviewing Brandon Little from ARTEFKT Watches. Brandon is a friend of mine, used to work for Shinola before starting his own company that's currently live on Kickstarter, ARTEFKT. And before Shinola, worked for the Fossil Group. And so this man has been in the watch industry as a designer and an expert industrial designer at that for a very long time. And you just have to hear his story. If you've listened to some of these episodes before, you know that I am a huge fan of the phrase, as the tide rises, all ships rise. You might consider Brandon a competitor. He's starting his own brand. He used to work for some of my competitors. I don't consider any of the American watch companies competitors. I think as a tide, we are rising, and together we're taking on the Swiss. And I really like the phrase, why let the Swiss have all the fun? Brandon's trying to make watches in the United States just like I am. He's trying to build them in Detroit just like his, former employer, Shinola. And it's just a beautiful story, especially his background and how he got into it. So check it out. And yeah, this is American Dreamers, the show about crazy people like me who think we can make things in the United States. And I think Brandon might just be as crazy as I am. Check it out.
Ready to roll when you are.
Good. All right, Brandon.
You got it, brother.
Most people think visionaries like me and you are crazy or stupid.
Yeah.
Which one are you?
I think both. I think there's a little bit of, there's probably a little bit of naivety into anybody that's going after this, to be quite honest. But I think that's like a totally good thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's stupidity, but let's just say maybe naivety.
Yeah, I agree. I like that word. We've always said, and I like, you got to be a certain type of delusional to think you can be here and be an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
So how was yesterday?
Yesterday was
launched on Kickstarter, first day of Windup.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was amazing. I mean, we went live, as you know, like at I think at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and the response from everybody's just been amazing. And it continues to sort of grow. We launched obviously in Chicago. And that was really nice, and we showcased the product for the first time. So we've got actually some people who've come back now a second time. And been like, hey, I saw you in Chicago. I'm back here in New York. It's such an awesome weekend. One gentleman, I think, definitely purchased something. So to me, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Like people are actually coming back, and it's not just sort of like, hey, this is great. It's a new thing, which always sort of captivates people. But yeah, people are coming back, and they're like, great to see you again, or I saw you here. Or didn't I see this before, which is always nice because it sort of has some sort of resonance where it seems like they're familiar with it. And I'm like, no, actually, this is our first time here in New York for Chicago for the Windup. So I couldn't be happier. And then the Kickstarter campaign went great. As you know, we would think we're midway there.
Yeah.
And we had people waiting, which was nice, because it's always one thing when everyone's just like, oh, this is great. And then it's different when it comes to like, all right, let's interact and actually purchase something.
Yeah.
So that's a big unknown until you sort of just pull the trigger. But yeah, it's been awesome. So
Sure.
yeah.
Oh, it's such a good feeling.
Yeah.
So let's rewind. Take us back. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah.
Talk about your childhood, and then I'm wondering, leading into how'd you get into watches and the watch industry? But
Sure.
Go all the way back.
All the way back. So I grew up in small town Louisiana, so Lafayette, Louisiana, Cajun country.
Cool.
And was just sort of always in the creative fields. I'm highly dyslexic, so back then I didn't really know what to do with you, so to speak. And so I was in a lot of different classes and a lot of different things, but what I did know how to do is sort of create with my hands. So they sort of just threw me into every creative outlet that you could have. And I usually would pick it up really fast. So from sculpture to ceramics, and then locally we had a big sort of Catholic church sort of community, and they had a lot of stained glass. So I ended up apprenticing at a stained glass shop. And that was like probably my younger sort of sophomore year in high school. And ended up picking it up really well. So then I started selling stained glass windows, and then like that led to stained glass jewelry for a little while. And then I ended up at a carpentry shop and started getting into carpentry. So everything just sort of like was in that world, that tactile world.
Yeah.
And yeah, sort of just grew up sort of in the black sheep. I was sort of really athletic, but then also very creative at the same sense. And that was a really different when you're in southern Louisiana. Yeah, kind of from there, got a little lost out of high school, and everyone's just like, just become an architect or something. And ended up at a school for architecture, and I was just like, this is totally the wrong place for me. Like, mathematically speaking, technically, it was completely going to be a failure. And sort of knew a couple of people within the arts industry, and they were like, hey, go into graphic design or fine arts. And so I ended up at LSU doing graphic design and fine arts. Did really well there, and ended up here in New York my junior year. Our class was coming out to do a tour of design studios, and we had done a big project for AIGA, which is sort of a conglomerate for graphic designers and advertisers. And I had won the contest to do all the branding for it. So when they came up, I sort of bypassed them, just sort of, I don't even know why I felt this was the right thing to do, and called all the agencies and said, you know, my school's coming through to do a tour. How about I come in and do an interview? And
Smart.
so I show up and stay at a friend's house. I remember sitting in the lobby of like a really well-known ad agency. And so the school comes in and they're going through the tour, and I'm sort of sitting in the lobby with my portfolio. And they're like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm interviewing for, you know, a job, basically. And got it. And so spent the summer here working at an ad agency called Spotco, which is sort of like the pinnacle of ad agencies. Like there was De La Gorda, which is they did all Broadway stuff.
Yeah.
They did, we did CD covers for Michael Jackson, Aerosmith, Paul Simon, like all the big people. And in fact, the Aerosmith CD that they did that year was one of their albums where they were in southern Louisiana kind of thing. So actually all my information is on there because I did all the hand renderings for it. So I snuck in little bits and bobs in the CD cover. But I left there, the crazy part is like I had this incredible experience, and then left there and was just like, I don't want to be in graphic design to save my life. Because the amount of effort that, and this is a testament to graphic designers, is the amount of effort you put into it, the longevity of it is like that.
Right.
So your interaction with graphics is very brief, especially in that world where it was CD covers were sort of in transition, we're moving into digital music. So anyway, got back to Baton Rouge, where LSU is, and was listening to sort of, I think, like an early kind of podcast back in the day. And someone had mentioned something about Tommy Hilfiger or Ralph Lauren, and they had done a chair. And I was really into furniture. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. So I was sort of like thinking about this, and I was like, you know, if there was a venue for creativity, at least commercial creativity, that fashion felt really interesting because you could have a sort of wide array of stuff. Like, I think they had done a car at that point, you know, and so all these brands were doing all these collabs. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So then I called my parents and I was like, I think I'm gonna go into fashion design. And this was my senior year of college. And I was like, I'm not gonna graduate. I'm just gonna go now. And they were kind of upset about that. And because I had, I think, one more class to take. No. And so I left and moved back to New York and got a job in men's clothing. And did that for like 6 years. And basically, in that transition, the gentleman that I was working with also did shoes and did some other things. So I started gradually moving back to sort of 3D product. And industrial design back then really wasn't a thing. So you sort of were kind of just figuring it out. And the 7th in New York, they used to have these amazing vintage flea markets, and you would have loved it. This is so right up your alley.
Sounds cool as hell.
All of 7th Avenue used to be a flea market. None of that stuff was there. So you had all these empty parking lots, and from like 23rd up on 7th Avenue, on Saturday and Sunday, you would have all these vendors, and it's all outdoor. And so you used to walk around on Sundays or Saturdays, and we called it a route. We'd walk this route, and we would just, I love antique shops. And so we would go back and look at all these like vendors, and they'd have just tons of stuff, jewelry, stuff, just stuff. And they always had pocket watches.
Oh yeah, I bet.
And they were amazing. And they had actually some really awesome, I wish now I would have known, I know now I would have bought all of it, but they they had these vendors,
wristwatches,
because none of this was a thing, right? Like, so it wasn't a thing at all, right? So they would have some dealers who were dealing secondhand watches in little cases. And now that I think back on it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm sure there were some amazing deals in there. But nonetheless, there was an old pocket watch at one point, and it was really beat up, just a bunch of pieces. And I was like, oh, I just liked it. It was so big. Caliper was huge.
Yeah.
The balance wheel was massive.
Yeah.
You could see everything. It was highly decorated. And I bought it, and that really kind of re-energized. I was like, what is this? And it was the technicality between the graphic design, the industrial design, all those, in the engineering, the specificity of it. And that caught my attention on watches. So I started kind of getting further down the pipe on watches. And AP Royal Oak had just launched an ad campaign, and this was really a long time ago. This is 25 plus years ago. And that also caught my attention. I was like, well, that's cool. And then so I launched another company at that point, and it sent me to Miami. And when I was doing the research for it through Richmond Group, they had just put out their numbers for the year. And in their report, if you read all these guys' reports, they kind of list out everything that they're investing in. And they had said in the investment that they were launching a master's program underneath Richmond Group in Milan, Italy.
Oh, wow.
And I had already applied to the Rolex school in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
so it's like
Watch Technicum.
I knew I wanted to get into watches. So I had applied to that, and I was in Miami. I was flying back and forth to New York, and Sarah, my wife, was like, hey, why don't you just go ahead and apply for this thing in Richmond Group. Yeah. And basically it was one person from every country. So it was like 30 students, one from every country. You come in and you get the sort of crash course in their brands, and then you get placed within their brands. And one of my things was always like, how does like someone from like Southern Louisiana end up working at Cartier? I thought that was like, to me that was like so foreign, right? Yeah. Like in Paris working at a luxury jewelry brand. And so I scraped together my portfolio, put it in the mail, and then like was back here doing a project with a men's company that I worked with, and got a phone call, and they were like, from Milan, and they're like, hi, we'd like to have you
Do you
come
want
to
be
Milan.
The American?
Yeah, and
God,
we'll
so
pay for the
cool.
whole thing too, which was like insane. So
well, it's so smart from them because they're
for them it's
recruiting
brilliant.
top talent from all people, I would assume 30 different countries.
Yeah, which was bananas.
So cool.
That was the real pivotal moment of me going from this is sort of an idea and doing what I was doing, and then getting into watches.
And that was 2000-ish?
Ish. So that was, about 25 years ago. So we were the second class to do it. And I was sort of the first, I think, American.
Yeah.
And then I ended up at J.G. Lecoultre in Switzerland. Yeah. And lived in Valley de Joux and worked for them. And I think I was the first American to ever do that.
Wow.
Which was crazy.
And that was all for Richmond Group, right?
Yeah.
And so which brands did you get to work with?
We did projects for all of them. Okay. So basically the way that it works is the CEO comes in, or the chief creative officer, whoever it is, and they download you on a real-time project, and then you've got X amount of weeks to work on it. And then out of that collection of work, they pick a handful, and it goes into their property, so they can do production on it and they can move on it. So we did projects for Cartier, Panerai, Ferrari, who else? Lancel, they own a bag company. We did a huge range. Montblanc was just in the process of launching their jewelry collection. Cool. And so we did a huge project for all of their jewelry, which was great because you get to fly out. You fly out to all these places and you get to get firsthand knowledge of how they work. Right. So we were up in Hamburg, Germany, and got to tour the Montblanc facility, and it was so really awesome. Yeah. The Ferrari project, we got to go out to their track in Italy, and they were test driving Formula Ones, and it was like
no big deal. Yeah,
and you're just like, what is going on? But it was cool because it kind of fit the narrative. I was like, how does a guy like me end up in a spot like this? And I ended up being surrounded by, and I still know a lot of them, some amazing people. And Eva is the head of Graph Diamonds. She's one of the most talented designers on the planet. Yeah. So she's ended up there. Luca is one of the senior high horology designers and jewelry designers for LVMH. Wow. So you ended up with these people that, I mean, could just, especially a couple of them, could just manipulate the pencil like so fast and create these amazing objects, and you're just like, holy smokes, this is so cool.
Well, and that's probably really cool seeing, like, fast forward to today, seeing other people that were one of the other 30 in that class or around you now at LVMH and these big brands.
Yeah.
That's got to be really cool.
Yeah, it's cool. And then there's another gentleman, a silversmith, Forbes, his dad, Patrick Mavros from Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Another like just insanely creative people.
Yeah.
And they all came from these incredibly different backgrounds. Yeah. And the funny part is like some of us, a number of us, really couldn't really communicate well with each other.
Yeah.
I spoke terrible Italian, and some of them spoke really terrible English.
Yeah.
But we all managed to like connect so deeply, and most of it we all laughed. It was like all through Sharpie. We're like, it was like Pictionary. You know, it was like a little bit of this, and be like point and be like, and trying to articulate kind of what we were feeling.
Yeah.
And that was really awesome because people were like, how did you manage in Switzerland? Because I didn't speak English well. And I was like, I felt like I spoke to everybody and everyone understood what we were trying to say and do. And it was mainly through illustrations, pointing, and just body language. And I think creative people, or makers at least, we understand how to read like body language well and communicate through our hands and gestures or just, pointing things out. So it was really amazing. And then, fast forward, I ended up coming back to the States, and Fossil Group at that time had their portfolio, and that managed a bunch of overseas brands. Yeah. And I was, I think, the only American at that time who had international experience overseas and then back in the U.S., especially within watches. And so we had gotten in touch with each other, and they hired me, and then I ended up being the chief creative officer of that group.
For Fossil.
For Fossil Group, got to work on just about every project under the moon and met a lot of great people, and then also helped establish a couple of things for them in Switzerland. And we kicked off Zodiac, which is here, and that was sort of my baby for a while. And then, I kind of did that, and then decided to pull back a bit. Ended up at Bedrock, which owns Shinola, Filson, and others. And there was a great opportunity to start sort of more focused, sort of very tactical little mini studio within that organization. Yep. And doing sort of what we did at a very large scale for Fossil Group, but a little bit more of a bespoke sort of project for Bedrock. And COVID hit, so that sort of changed the entire landscape. Yep. And through that, I took on more and more at Shinola, and then ended up at Shinola for, I think, 4 or 5 years doing head of design for Shinola. Awesome. So then clip a couple more forward, and then sort of came the opportunity for that to come to an end. And I had been with those group of persons for 16 years. So it was,
because a lot of the team from Fossil went over to Bedrock, Shinola, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Especially some of the persons I was really close with, some of the senior leadership. Which was awesome because it was sort of, we were all just a family, and we're just like, let's just go. And it's very much sort of that entrepreneurial at all costs, like, let's just go. Yeah. And all of us in that world were just like, at a drop of the dime, hey, we need to go to New York, let's go. Yeah. We need to go to Hong Kong, let's go. And it's sort of like, that mentality.
For sure. And I think it's so cool. Like, I talked to like Peter from Jack Mason, and he worked with you at the Fossil Group. And, I met Marisa, from Bedrock. Yeah. All these people that I meet through networking on the manufacturing side or just other entrepreneurs here in the building. Yeah. And every time I say your name, they're just like, oh my God, I've known him for a decade, and like we worked on this project at Zodiac, or we did this, or, it's got to be cool to have all these connections that you've, worked up with. So I guess my next question for you is, with all this experience working for and with, especially big groups and all these other brands, what was the kicker that made you want to start your own thing and do it yourself?
Yeah, it's funny. It was this show 2 years ago. I'd been doing watches for so long, and I was like, maybe I don't do any more watches. Maybe it's time to sort of move on. And I was like, you know what? I did well enough to where I could take at least 6 months off. So I was like, I'm just going to travel. And I went to all the shows. And it was this show specifically in New York 2 years ago, came in and was like, I'm just going to crash the Zodiac booth. But I'm going to crash the Zodiac booth from the consumer side, which I hadn't done in forever. Can't even remember the last time I was at a show and not like at a booth.
You're behind the table.
Yeah. And no one really no one knows who I am, to be quite honest. And so I'm just standing next to the booth, acting as if I'm looking at the watches for the first time. And some of them I was, because Ryan and that team are progressing. And so, but I was just listening to people, and people were coming in and they were like, oh, I love this watch, or I bought this watch, and my dad bought that watch, and I had this one, and they were saying some sort of memory about something, and they were just totally, honestly geeking out.
Yeah.
And they were geeking out over things that I either had a part of in some shape or form, or some way had done, right? And so
It's gotta be such a cool feeling.
I was like, and it just like came back immediately. And I was telling Jorg from Christopher Ward yesterday, he and I were catching up, and he and I have known each other for over 16 years. And I was like, at the beer garden in Basel, this was a while back, but before Basel got really big, it was really sort of like this industrial mix-up, mash-up. You had diamond dealers, you had machine part dealers, you had watch dealers, you had a couple of independents. And basically you would go out into the beer garden in the afternoons after the show, and everyone would just have beer, really bad beer. But and it didn't matter what stash, where you were. It didn't matter if you came working out of the Patek booth or the Rolex booth or the diamond dealer, like it didn't matter.
Yep.
And everyone would just be like having a good time.
Yeah.
And I told him, I was like, the atmosphere in the micro market right now is very much that.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of enthusiasts, a bunch of people who just want to make stuff at all costs, right?
Yeah.
And they're going for it. And I left that show, and I had a conversation with a buddy of mine in Japan, and he's like, try. He's like, at least, like, you know, you've never sat and gone through the process that you've developed for everybody else to do something on for yourself, right? Like, go through the process of interviewing yourself, asking you, what do you want to create? How do you want to create it? All the things that we've technically sort of do. And that was like, threw me for the biggest curveball.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
And that was, that really kind of started. And then I was like, I want to do this. And I had a couple of projects that I had been exploring for years in my back pocket.
Yeah.
And everyone was always like, oh, it's too weird, or it's too this, or it's too that. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna, like, zero compromise. I'm gonna do everything I've ever wanted to do. And in business, there's always compromisations, right? Of course, and it's commerce as well. So I was like, screw it. Like, it's gonna be my dollar, my name, my face, my product. Let's just make something I absolutely want.
Yep.
Period. And I want to set the business up the way I've always wanted to set it up. You know, small batch production, general numbers that work, you know, commitments that make sense. You know, we do in the 1% for the planet. So things that are like super close to me, and no one's gonna tell me no. So it's just me. So I was like, all right, like, if we're gonna give this a go, I'm gonna give it a go and make exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And what I want it to be. And if it fails, then it fails. It's totally fine.
Yep.
But at least then I can, like, if I need to turn that chapter, then I can turn the chapter and know that I gave it everything. You know what I mean? And
That's a
so
beautiful
so
thing.
we're kind of like in that little wiggle zone where it is. But yeah, really have to thank the enthusiast market for it, to be honest. So.
Yeah. Well, I like that, the analogy and just like the nostalgia of like thinking back to Basel World and having a beer with the executives of companies and the people just working the booths and everybody in between.
Yeah.
You're right. Like, that's how Windup, especially, but how the enthusiast market and kind of the micro brand market feels is we're all in this together.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I think that's super special. I think, like, even the reactions yesterday, because, you know, it's like, it's really, there's a lot of trust, right? Because you're doing something intrinsically that needs to deliver. Like, it's not like we're making pants, as an example, where, of course, like, it needs to wear well. But in general, it's not much of like a utility item that has to really deliver on a promise unless you're into really technical apparel. So for me, watches, like, it's a really big trusting relationship. You know, because yes, you're selling them something aesthetically that's amazing. Right. But you're also saying, hey, I'm promising you it's going to be +4 - 6. It's 20 ATM. It's incredibly well built. The straps fit well. Everything works, right? And it's not cheap either, you know, so it's a rather big commitment to ask of someone. But when you get people involved and you start talking to them, especially as the community, it's just they're so enthusiastic and they're so trusting, and they're so educated that you can't really, you know, bullshit them around. Like, you can't really finagle that narrative. And it's nice when people, and I know you get this when people pick up your watches, when people pick it up, they can immediately, like, they get it. They're like, oh, okay. Like,
that light bulb moment is, I think, one of the best experiences for me. Is just bringing something to life, and then, to your point, having somebody experience it for the first time and react to it is so cool. And everybody reacts differently.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, I love people. I think humans are so incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
But when you see people walk by, and you know, it's just very common. You know, notice this at the shows and even other shows where, you know, people will do a drive-by.
Yep.
And you can catch them like, look, and they're interested,
yeah.
right? Or they just haven't seen it, and they're like, well, what's that? And they drive by again.
Yep.
And they drive by again. And then now I've gotten in the habit and been like, I will literally be like, come
Yeah,
over here. Like, come see.
pick it up.
And they're like, what? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, just come over.
Yeah.
Like, trust me, you're not going to lose anything by coming over and like letting me introduce you to this thing.
Yeah.
So I think people might think I'm nuts, but I'm like, you know what? Why not?
No,
like,
well,
like, let's go.
And to your point, like now you're the everything. You're the face of the brand. You're, you know, running the company, and so there are no more humans between you and the customer.
No.
Especially at an event like this.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably one of the coolest things about the micro brand market and just all of these micro brands. And I think that's why the customers really appreciate being able to come and see all this stuff.
Yeah.
Is there's no barriers. There's no glass wall between you and the product. And it's literally the founder of the company handing you a watch and say, hey, check this out. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the clutch things about this is if it's not the founder, it's someone incredibly close to it.
For sure, yeah.
Second in command. And usually, I mean, most of us, I would guess, are probably, you know, under 20 people total in terms of some of the bigger brands in the house.
Even the bigger ones.
Yeah.
Well, and even the bigger ones like Oris, they have their whole, you know, executive team here.
Yeah.
And one of the CEOs of Oris is usually at these events, especially in New York. So
yeah, and I think, I mean, there's
awesome.
no better way to connect to your customer in this day and age. And I know everyone's got a different way of doing things, and some of the really, I mean, of course, I still respect and really love and admire Richmond Group. I think they do an incredible job at what they manage in terms of the volume and how they communicate and interact with their customers. So it's really different.
Yeah.
Still very personal because they put a lot of pride into that, but it's very different in how we do that here. And I think it's interesting to try to take some of those little snidbits of, you know, the patience. And I think that was one thing that I learned well with Richmond, that they talk to you a lot about is just the patience.
Yep.
They're like, you know, get to know the customer.
Yep.
Have them come to your house, so to speak. Have them sit with the product. And it's not a selling tactic. It's just patience. It's just getting to know each other. And I think that's something really important. I think that's something that the shows really offer, especially if you do all the shows.
Yep.
And I value that coming out of Chicago and seeing people again.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's so good. Like I'm seeing people twice.
Yep.
And I can't wait for next year, like where you see people more and more, and people come back and they're like, hey, like good to see you again.
Yep.
Whether they don't buy anything at all, like it doesn't really matter, right? And it's just building that sort of rapport and that being constant and active in the community. And then things happen, right? And I think that that's super special about the shows. And you can see that from the shows, and you guys are part of that, have been in these shows for quite a while, right?
Yeah.
So
I can't wait for you to have the experience of, you know, next year at the show, somebody walking up to you wearing your watch.
That's gonna be,
And they walk up and they're just like, you know, and it's like,
I got the first one, or
yeah.
like whatever number that they asked for.
Oh, it's the best. It's the best feeling.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, and they're so excited. And they're like, you know, I wore this watch because I knew you'd be here.
Yeah.
And they want to share. I mean, it's the enthusiasm. They want to share it with you too.
Yeah, that's gonna be really special.
Engine on your wrist that tells time, and you're both just stoked about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's fantastic. I mean, we had a gentleman yesterday, more than one, but one specific guy had never met him, and he comes charging in, and you know, we have that small table, right, which I really enjoy because I have usually people all around me.
The round table and the way you set it up is really smart.
Yeah, and guy comes charging in, big grin on his face, and he's just like, I just backed you on Kickstarter. I got a watch, and I don't think he had seen the watches in Chicago or here yet. Yeah. And he's like, I wanted to see them so I could pick the one that I want.
Oh, awesome.
And it was just super rad.
Yeah.
So I was like, this was an example of a gentleman who hadn't seen them in New York, had probably, I guess, just seen them on Instagram on our account. And he was so stoked, and he was so like just friendly, and just came charging in. I was like, that alone, the show could have been a failure.
For sure.
And that one would have been like, yes. And there's another gentleman that came back with his son, and he had seen it in Chicago.
Yeah.
had brought his son from New York because his son was here.
Oh,
and
cool.
they came in and were looking at all the watches. So I was like, okay, like it's perfect.
Well, and they're investing in you just as much as they're investing in the product,
Yeah.
especially this early. You know,
Yeah.
they've seen samples, but like,
Yeah.
you know, when somebody can't leave with the watch,
Yeah.
I mean, that's some of the best, I think, just validation that you can get is they trust you.
Yeah.
You know, you're telling the story just like you did, and you're showing them what they're going to get.
Yeah.
And that's I think the beauty of Kickstarter too. It's just
Yeah.
like we're all in this together, like crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. Like the crowd is going to help you bring it to life. So
Yeah.
let's get into what exactly Artifact is and like the background of the company, where did the name of the company come
Sure.
from, and then talk about the products at least that are like live on Kickstarter right now.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, when we sort of sat down and I went through this process that I go through for clients, or at least I used to go through with clients. What do you want to be? What do you really want to say? And we usually try to narrow that down to like 3 things.
Okay.
Because if you really want to communicate more than 3, it's really quite tough.
Yeah.
A couple of things that I've always loved. Like I said, I grew up with going to antique shops and the flea markets here, and I was like, they're always artifacts. Like they're like they are technically artifacts, right? And so immediately when we're looking for names and stuff like this, I was like, okay, I think I want to call it Artifact. One thing that is what I wanted to make was modern artifacts. Yeah. The other thing was that I knew that I struggle personally between being a craftsman and being a designer, but then also being outdoors. So I usually like end up in this weird spot where I'll hyper focus and be in my workshop making things, and then I'll pull out, almost like I'm done with it, like I've accomplished it.
Yep.
And then I'll be like, no, I want to go do a 75-mile run or something. I'll set some new target, and it's usually outdoor based, and want to do that. So I was like, okay, I need to, whatever I do here needs to fill the void in the middle, right? So I need a product that a watch that I can do and express sort of the creative componentry that I'm interested in. But then I also need something that I know that can help me when I want to pull out of the studio and go for a run, go for a mountain bike ride, or do an adventure sort of based goal. That really kind of helped me position where I wanted to be within the watch space. Because I had a couple of designs, like I had said. One was, and I still have it, is a dress watch. And I was like, oh, that's really, I love this thing, and I've had it in my pocket forever. But I was like, it's going to put me down a spot where I'm going to feel pigeonholed, because I know through experience that I end up in this spot where I'm making some of these things that I do, and then I want to sort of just retreat from it because I want to go do outdoor stuff. And so we kind of landed on, okay, so we're going to make modern artifacts, and we're going to make a performance platform.
Yeah.
But that performance platform needs to be modular so that I can sort of jack with it. And I need it to be as close to the product as possible. So same as you guys are, I needed to have some level of hands-on, right? I couldn't just be designing product, having it made, having it delivered, and I'm sort of just this marketing entity. Yeah. I have to get dirty, so to speak. So we built it flat because I'm also a knife buff, and I was like, I know I can manipulate flat surfaces a lot easier than I can manipulate curved surfaces. Yep. So we had modern artifacts. We knew it needed to be a duality, so this duality between being a sport product but also a creative product. Right. And we knew that we needed to be sort of really well engineered. Yep. Years ago when I was doing jewelry, I did titanium, and we were one of the first groups to do titanium that was vacuum cast. And it produces an incredible result. And so I knew also that I wanted to be back in the material spec of titanium, because I had history with it. I love it. All my things that I wear, my wedding ring, is stuff that I had done in titanium. So I knew it wore really well. And so we sort of started going down this list is, okay, if we're going to make modern artifacts and we're going to make a performance-based product, we want a material that sets us apart. Because everyone does stainless steel. And I think I had said earlier, is like I'd always been told no. And so even at Zodiac, I was like, let's do titanium. And they're like, oh, it just needs to be a limited edition. It doesn't work. People don't get it, blah, blah. And that always just was just like, and I was like, bullshit. I was like, it's a better it makes a better product, in my opinion. Yeah. And so I was like, you know what? We're going to do only titanium. And then we started the process of finding ways to get this all made. Yeah. And it really became an engineering project after that. And we ended up with some shapes that I had been playing with from a Leica camera lens and other things in my history that I've been involved with. And I was like, all these little things that you build over decades And they're all the little bits that people had kind of said maybe no to or shelved. And I was like, I call it my deck of cards. I'm gonna pull that and put that in my deck of cards. And so when I sat down and went through that process of like, what does this want to be? I just started pulling back all those deck of cards.
Yeah.
And I have huge volumes of notes, images, sketches, all that stuff. I keep it all. And so I went through all of that stuff and was just like, oh, that's that page. And I remembered it, or I do big collage walls. I keep all the collage walls that I do. I take them down, I put the images in folders.
Yep.
And so I went through all of that stuff. And the funniest thing is that they were from decades differences.
Yeah.
There was sometimes the same photo, but taken differently by different photographers. So things had been catching my eye for all that time. And I was like, okay, that one, this one, this one. And I started to build that palette. And then we launched ARTEFKT. So we launched, it's called Versa right now. So Versa being for the versatility. And we launched it as 01 in Chicago, I think. And sat with it to try to figure out what are we going to name this thing. It's like kind of like naming your dog or your cat or your kid even. Sometimes it's better to do that after you've known them for a little while, you know, because you're like, wow, that's really not a Ryan. He's totally, you know, whatever. Scott.
Yeah, like you said, humans are fascinating.
Yeah,
so it's just
but time lets things evolve, and so I was really happy that we had named it, you know, and
you named the company, but not the product.
The company, ARTEFKT,
first product,
So we sat with Versa after Chicago, and. Loved the versatility of it, loved the way that it was feeling, and I kind of went back to sort of the sport component and said, okay, what did I build this for? And if it's either trail running or just running, mountain biking, cross-country skiing, cycling, it's really more of an XC lifestyle, right? Or swimming or kayaking, since we do have that 20 ATM. And so, that's how we ended up with the name, so it's Versa XC. And the product really kind of, after the fact, feels like it really captures that, right? So we've got the grade 5 titanium, we've got the 20 ATM, so it's a 660-foot dive depth, incredibly dialed in package for top line everything. I mean, really, I put everything into it. Like there's no skimping, there's nothing hidden, because it's also incredibly thin and very simple. I really worked through my process of taking everything off, right? I was like, no. Like we struggled with the date window, and everyone was like, oh, you should have a date window. And I was like, is this big? And unfortunately, you know, I was telling a gentleman, one thing we learned at Richmond Group was a gentleman who came in, and I wish I knew who had said this, because it's his quote, not mine. But he was like, most people who read a watch read the time left. So when you look at your watch, you're reading, I have 5 minutes left to 11 o'clock.
Oh.
You don't necessarily, you're not processing that it's 11:55, right, or 12:55. You're looking and reading what's left in the hour,
until the next hour.
And whether or not that was true or not,
when
I thought about it and when I look at my watch, I usually notice that I'm going at a glance. And I'm visualizing where that hand is and how much I have left to the time that I have planned in my head.
That makes sense.
And so when we did the dial and we did the hands, everything was sort of gauged off that. I was like, how can I make this to where usually it's a quick glance style.
Simple.
It's not this case, and some watches are meant to be sort of admired and stared deeply into, you know, especially in the dress watch platform. This is really meant to be quick glance, read, and keep going, right? And I kind of just started massaging that, and it all really sort of came together. And so we're showcasing the whole collection. Here right now, at least we have 5 pieces. We have Baseline, Blue Hour, Rogue, Canyonlands, and La Pointe. And we've kind of tried to illustrate the versatility that the case offers from Baseline being just completely normcore to La Pointe, which is the one where we hand distress it in our studio and pull it back, so it kind of looks like this weird mashup of like a Star Wars, you know, laser gun kind of thing. But in a really technical way. And then we've got our bracelets also that are on there as well, that are incredible. And so we're showing everything. Everything is online for Kickstarter for pre-sale.
Awesome. And
so.
Talk about real quick the signature that you leave on the back.
The Seed of Life. So that goes back to that numerology part. So 7 is in the brand name. And 7's just an incredible number. And I'm geek out pretty heavily on this sort of yin and yang, and especially Asian influences and sort of Eastern kind of philosophy. And so 7 manifests itself in all these incredible, whether that's 7 days of the week,
Yep.
cycles, east, northwest, all this stuff is like really incredible. And so the seed of life is a natural reoccurring geometric pattern. Then you find that throughout nature, and that's the overlapping circles. And if you continue to manipulate that and expand it out, it creates all of these different patterns and structures. And so we've used that as our sort of logo, our true north is what I call it. And it's sort of that interconnectivity. And it goes back to that duality of where I know I need to be hands-on. I know I need to be in a workshop and working with my hands, but then I also know I need to be out in nature. Because if I'm not between those two, I'm not my best self, right? And I don't think that's unique to me. I think that people in general, when they're outdoors and they're highly engaged in a certain task, I think that's where you're at your best. And I think if we can create a product that kind of helps ignite that, our kind of our creed is to build community and inspire action. So it's like, if this can help you be sort of like an impetus to be like, I want to learn more about watches, or I want to learn more about titanium or engraving or whatever, but then I also want to go for a run, or I want to go on an adventure because it's built to do that, right? And it helps you maybe just that little nugget to be like, let's go. It's like when you buy a new bike, you're like, well, now I got to go ride it. So you either bought it because you're like, I'm geeking out because this is the coolest bike I've ever bought, and then you're like, well, now I got to go ride it. So then you're like, now you're off, and maybe now you've gotten into cycling more than you would have ever gotten into, and it's not because you were a cyclist, it's because you just were really interested in the craftsmanship of the bike.
Love it.
And I think watches can play that role. So yeah.
Well, Brandon, the last question I always ask, I feel like you've answered in your backstory, but specifically, when I say American dream, what does the American dream mean to you?
Ingenuity is it for me. I think we grow up with a let's go attitude, and when I say we, I'm just talking because we're referencing like us as Americans, right, or growing up in America, and I've been fortunate to have been raised this way. Is like you have an idea, like all right, let's go, let's go figure it out. And you might not know what you're doing at all. I'm fortunate enough to know a little bit about what I'm doing, and sometimes I think I don't. But to me, and it's the same with you, I think, when you and I met, was like, let's go. And if I don't know how to do it, I'm gonna figure it out. And I'm not worried about knocking on a door, and knocking on your door and be like, hey, I don't know how to do this, or I think I can do this. Can you help me figure this out? And you're like, yeah. And I think like that's very much a US based thing. Is like, hey man, you want to try to figure out, do you want to make that part? Or you want to, do something that's completely bananas, And I think, whether we like them or not, and it's Tesla or Elon Musk or all these people, there is a thing, Apple or not, where it's like, I've got this crazy idea, and our ideas are probably not clearly as crazy as some others. But I think there's this innate atmosphere, whether it's not courage, maybe isn't the word, maybe it's naivety that we said earlier, right? But it's this dream, and you're like a dreamer. And I've met dreamers, and I've met them all over the world, where they're thinking in their head and they're manifesting through their hands or through their voice, right? And I think that's a very specific thing. And I think we have an atmosphere here to do that. And I think we've got a community to do it, which is phenomenal. And I mean, what else are you gonna do? I mean, I'm sure you're the same way. If I'm flying or I'm driving or I'm on my bike, all I'm doing is dreaming of stuff. In my head.
Can't turn
what can, like, probably too much. But
probably should focus on that thing that's right in front of you.
But like I said, in that duality component, that 7 component, an artifact is, I don't think one would be without the other. I don't think me taking a leap and putting myself in the show, or me taking a leap and doing some other exercise leads to the thought process, which leads to the creative process, which then leads back to pushing me back to the physical process, right? So it's sort of like this ping pong effect, and that we do. And I think makers in general get very physical, and the feedback from that physical action is just as rewarding than the feedback from the process of being like the manifestation component, right? Where you're dreaming. So there actually is a feedback happens, a loop happens, that tactile experience feeds the other one.
For sure.
Because people, I'm sure you know people that are just like, have tons of ideas, but never necessarily put the foot on the ground and make it, right? And I think once you get that drug, I think it's one thing somewhere in your childhood, somewhere something happened where you're like, I'm gonna jump that ramp. And you went from, I'm so scared, I'm gonna hurt my body, I'm gonna break something possibly. It's terrifying to just, something snapped in your brain and you're like, I'm gonna do it. And you did it. And you might not have landed it at all.
Nope.
Crushed yourself, but you did it. And I do think, and I have kids, I know it, when that happens, it creates a pattern. And if you keep that pattern going, you know, I think you become kind of who we are, right? And I think, you know, we're lucky enough to have that, I think, in our DNA, so to speak, or in our culture, especially at our age, you know, growing up skateboarding and other stuff. It's like, well, just do it. And it's terrifying, you know? So I hope that our kids now continue, you know, but I think we're of a generation that we're just like, let's go. You do it. And you might break all your teeth. And then you get back up and you do it again because you're like, well, that was fun.
That was super fun.
So,
that's
you know,
awesome.
Well,
this was super fun, Brandon. Thank you so much for joining me for this. Right now, what's the best place for someone to go find you and see, you know, either the products you have on Kickstarter or the products themselves? Yeah,
if you go to artefakt7.com, we are really active on that. We've updated that site. Or on Kickstarter. So our Kickstarter handle is artefakt-watches. And we'll be on that from yesterday, so October the 18th to November 18th.
Great.
So that'll run through there, and it's really the best place right now to go do your pre-order because we have incredible incentives. We think we still have some 25 for 25, which is 25% off. And then we pivot into 20% off.
Sweet.
And then after that, Instagram, I'm really active on it. So I really do, you know, I'm old enough to where I don't know enough and I can't really focus on much more. So I've nailed, I think, communicating through Instagram.
Great.
And if you email, it's just me. So you can email at info@artefakt7, or you can email me directly at bdl@artefakt7, and I'm the person to follow up. And I think I do a pretty good job within 24 hours, you know, to get back to as many people as I can.
Awesome.
And then after this, we're going to be in Austin for Intersect. I think you're going to be there with us,
Absolutely.
right? So we will be capping off the campaign there, which is on the 16th, or if I remember, and we might be in Dallas. So, but if you go to the website, we have a list of everything that's available, artefakt7.com.
Sweet.
And if not, find me in person. And then 25, we'll be on the circuit. So we've got San Francisco Windup, Chicago, New York, and then we're going to do 3 Intersect shows. So we'll see where, you know, they pivot where they do it. Last year was in Southern California, and Austin, obviously, and Atlanta. So we'll see where they land there. But we're hoping that, you know, those are scattered out. So we'll be a part of those 3 shows also.
People can come see both of us there. I will
please
most likely be at all of that.
I mean, to me, that's like that's the reason we're doing it. Like, get out, come meet, enjoy seeing the watches, enjoy this community. So
that was an American Dreamers episode. If you want to hear more of these conversations, I want to hear from you first. Who else should I talk to? What other stories do you want to know from, you know, crazy visionaries like us and dreamers like the other people in this room? I want to keep these conversations going and this conversation going. So join us on YouTube. We're American Dreamers on YouTube. You can also email me at info@coloradowatchcompany.com. Anytime, send me your ideas. Say, hey, let's sit down with this person. I want to hear from you. So check it out. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And Brandon, thanks for being here.
Thank you, brother. Cool.